Okay guys, so we are going to go over how to create a terrain, and in this case I'm going to use this terrain here. We're going to use these contour lines to create a terrain. Alright, notice I have my building here positioned on my terrain, which is 6.5 meters by 6.5 meters, right? And I have my terrain here. Each of them has heights, so I know how high each of the lines are. Okay, so we'll put this to one side. Now we're going to open 3ds Max, and as usual the first thing we're going to do in Max is to go to custom UI and default switcher. We're going to make sure that we're using Mental Ray Design Viz, and we're just going to leave the color, which is the UI schemes, we're going to leave that on default and just click OK. Max might do some flashing, and then it's going to tell you to restart. You don't need to restart, at least not for what we're doing right now. The next thing we want to do is ensure that we know what units we are operating in. So we click units and we choose either from metric, US standard, or custom. Alright, so in this case I'm going to use meters because the drawing I have is in meters. Okay, so meters is and I click OK. Okay, so we're going to do this the quick and dirty way, I call it. So the first thing we're going to do is create a plane, and this plane we're going to use as a kind of a tracing base that we're going to trace the contour lines on. So to create a plane, as we know, we go to the create menu. Then what we're creating is geometry. It is a standard primitive, and these are the standard primitives here, and we want to create a plane. So we're going to create that plane. We click, hold, and drag and release. It doesn't matter the size of the plane right now. Alright, now we still have the plane tool activated, so we need to deactivate that. We can do that by either clicking it again or pressing the escape button. So now it's deactivated. Okay, so we have this plane here. If I select it, notice that it is selected because it gives me this highlight box around here. Alright, so what we need to do now is to get this image on top of this plane. And the simple way to do that is we're going to just browse to the image using our computer explorer, Windows file explorer, and we're going to just drag it to the plane. So let's do that now. Okay, so if I have pull up my Windows Explorer here, notice that I have located where I have this contour, and all I'm going to do is click, hold, and drag this image onto this plane, not onto the background of Max. This is important. You need to drag it onto the plane object and release. Now once you do that, you notice that okay, something has changed here, but you may not be seeing quite the same image being reflected here. So let's put this one side. Okay, now what we notice here, and I'm going to just orbit here, and if I zoom enough, notice that it's actually there, but they're really small, and notice it's being repetitive. So the first thing we have to do is we need to disable the option that causes this. So Max is actually trying to scale the texture that we have applied to this object. Now to change that option, we are going to modify this object. We click on it and we go over to the modify tab, which is here, and under the modify settings that we see here, notice that right here where we have real world map size, this is an option that is clicked by default when depending on the profile that you select in Max. Now what Max is doing is trying to scale our image to what it thinks is real world profile, is a real world size. We don't want that to happen now, so we're going to just uncheck that. And notice once you uncheck the real world map size option, this object will scale to the full extent of this plane. So for example, if I change the length or height of this plane, notice that the texture scales as well. And what I'm doing to change this is I'm clicking on the spinners, these are called spinners, and I click, hold, and drag. Okay, the next thing we need to do now is notice that the texture that we have here, we can't start tracing it just yet because notice that it's slightly skewed, and this might affect the accuracy of our image, right? Here is our image here, and if I open it, this is what we'll get here. So what we have to do is we need to ensure that the exact proportions of this image is the exact proportions that is here. So the first thing we have to do is to align the proportions, and then we scale it. So to align the proportions, a very neat trick that you can do is to use the same values that is the size of your image. So what we want to do is we want to see what resolution this image is at, and we want to just plug in the same resolution value, and it will actually give us the same proportions in Max. Now to do that, depending on which windows you're using, it's just a matter of looking at the properties of this image. So if I bring up Explorer, that's File Explorer, and here is File Explorer here, I could select the image, and notice when I hover over it, it tells me the dimensions of the image, right? You can see that it's 2840 pixels by 2256 pixels, right? Additionally, different versions of Windows might display that information down here on the status bar. You can also find out the resolution of an image by double clicking it, and when you double click it, it will open in whatever program you have to view images in, and you can usually right click and click on properties, or in this case file info, and notice file info tells me the dimensions of this image. All you need is the dimensions by whatever means necessary, right? And we want to plug in these dimensions into Max so that it ensures that the ratio of our image is equal. All right, so we see here that we're going to put in the width, and dimensions always show the width and the height. So the width is 2840. So if I go over here and go to my width, I put in 2840. This is the width of this object that I have here. It doesn't matter the units, whatever units you have here, we're going to scale it afterwards. And the height is 2256. 2256. Enter. Alright, so we're done with this now. And if we zoom out a bit, now our image is at the right proportion. So if I take, for example, switch to a top view, and this is a top orthographic view, and I take a look at my image here, notice that it's the same size. So I know I can now scale my image and not worry about it being skewed. So now let's scale the image. Now, as we should already know, to scale an image, all we need to know is at least a particular dimension. So I know that this is 6.5 meters by 6.5 meters. So what I'm going to do is draw a box. So I'm going to create a box by going to the create menu. a box is a geometric shape, so it would be under geometry. It is a standard primitives, and here we go, a box. So we're going to click on box. I'm going to switch back to my perspective view and orbit a bit. Hold Alt and middle mouse button to orbit in case we might forget. And I'm going to draw this box in. Alright, I'm not drawing it to any particular measurements right now. I'm just drawing it in first, and then I'm going to edit it. So I still have my box tool activated, so I'm going to press escape. Right, and with my box selected, I go over to my modify tab because I want to modify the length, width and height of my box. So right now I know I want my box to be 6 meters in the width. That's 6 meters. Next we're going to type in the length, and that is also 6.5 meters. And we're just going to put the height. Let's put the height at 3 meters, just for height's sake. Now notice that this is really small in comparison to our image, but this is actually the correct dimensions for the shape that we have here. So what we're going to do is scale the image that we have to match this shape. So let's zoom out a bit, and we're going to grab this image here. Now we're going to go to the scale button, which is here, and here we have the scale button. So we're going to click scale, and this is important. In Max we can scale on individual axes. Now it is important that we scale everything equally to ensure that we don't skew the image and hence making it inaccurate. So we're going to grip the center part. Notice the center of the scale gizmo. This is called a gizmo or a UCS. And we're going to click, hold and drag to scale it down. Alright, now we can do this from a top view to make life a bit easier. So I'm going to go to perspective view, and I'm going to go to top. Alright, there we go. So we scale it, we're scaling it down. Now how much we're scaling it down to, we don't know quite yet. And that's where our object comes in. So let's just find that object now. There we go. So I'm going to go to my move tool, and I'm going to click this object here, and I'm going to move it closer to the center of my scene. It's always a good practice to operate close to the center and not have objects far away from the center. So I'm going to move it, hover over the Y, move it up on the Y, then move it over on the X. Zoom in, up on the Y again. Alright. Now what we're going to do is we're not going to rotate our box to try and match the image. Instead, we're going to rotate the image or the site to try and match the box. So to do that, we're going to go to our rotate tool, which is here. We click rotate, and with the image highlighted, this is the plane that we drew, we're going to rotate it. So we're going to grab the axis here. Right, notice where you see the yellow marking. We need to make sure that we are rotating it about the z-axis, which is this yellow highlight here. We're going to click, hold and drag, and there we go. And we might have made this a bit too small, so we're going to use our scale tool, and we're going to scale it up a tad. Alright, we're just going to eyeball this, so we're going to use the move tool, and we're going to move this in, and let's scale it down just a bit here. All right, and that's pretty good. So that's what we're going to do. So let us switch back to perspective view, and let me orbit a bit. Hold Alt and middle mouse button, orbit a bit, and that looks pretty awesome. All right, So now what we're going to do is trace these contour lines so that we can, and then we're going to give them heights. So to trace contour lines, it's best done from a top view. So we're going to switch to a top view. Then we're going to create now line work. So we go to our create menu. Then when instead of going to geometry, we're going to go over to shapes, because we're going to create shapes now. And then we see our line tool here, so we're going to create a line. We're going to click that, and before we start drawing, I want us to scroll down a bit here. Let's scroll down and notice the creation method. This is on the creation method. What this is saying is that when you click once, you will get a corner. When you click and drag, you will get a corner as well. So I want, when I click and drag, I get a smooth, and when I click once, I also get a smooth line. So those are going to be my options for creating. And now we're going to create our line work. So I'm panning with the middle mouse button, and I'm just going to trace these by clicking once. Click again once. Notice that I'm giving it a bit of space. You don't need to make it very close. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and draw my next line. So I'm going to click once and click and click. Notice that, remember that terrains are organic shapes. I'm pressing escape there to stop. And it being organic shapes, I don't want us to worry too much about getting the exact precise length along this line. By the time you create your terrain, it will not matter in the big scheme of things. So I'm going to click here and click and click and click. You can zoom, you can also pan while you are drawing a line. That makes life a little helpful. And click again. If the grid is confusing you, you can press G on the keyboard to turn the grid add-on off. So I'm going to press G to turn it off. Right? I'm going to go ahead and create this line. A point to note, for example, when I'm tracing this line here, right? If I'm going to click and trace, I don't want to be making the points too close. So for example, I might click here and draw my line, then I might click here and draw my line, then I might click here, and then I might click here, and so forth and so forth. Notice that these distances here are not very close. If I was to make them close, then in the future, if you want to manipulate your terrain, it's going to make it very difficult. So as a good rule of thumb, what I try to do is to try and let the distance apart for your points here be not less than at least the distance of your closest contour line. Right, so this is probably my closest line, and maybe this at this point is my farthest line. So this distance is somewhere in between that range. So that's a good rule of thumb that you can use. All right, so I'm going to continue placing my lines. I'm going to click, click, click. Now in this case, when you get to the end, it will ask you a question. Do you want to close the spline? And of course you're going to click yes, because you do want it to be closed. Alright, so from here on now, we just need to complete our the rest of our terrain here. Close that spline. So I'm going to move ahead quickly just to get this done. Just going to speed along nicely here. Press escape at the end of every line. Notice that my lines aren't necessarily lining up, but that's okay. As I said, by the time you put on the rest of the contour lines, in the big scheme of things, it won't matter. I'm gonna go through my box here. Now another point to note is that you want to have enough land around your building object. So notice that I have a decent enough space so that when I render my images, it doesn't seem as if the world ends at the end of my contour line. So in my case, my drawing had enough space to begin with. If your drawing was, if your site was very small, then what you can do is just extend your contour lines beyond your drawing sketch. Alright? Though I wouldn't worry too much about it, as later on in the course we will show you how to simply scale your terrain mesh if it works out that it is too small. Alright, I think that's about it. So let me switch back to perspective view and orbit a bit by holding Alt and the middle mouse button. Let me pan around, and yeah, that's pretty much my contour lines. So I am going to come out of the line tool. Notice that my line tool is still activated, so I press escape, so it's no longer activated. Alright, so the next thing I want to do now is to give each of these lines some height. And notice what was very helpful here is the fact that I have written the heights onto my sketch, which makes life very easy. All I need to do is type in these values. Alright, so we're gonna give these values heights first. So all we need to do is type these values in, and that should be good to go. So we're going to type this in, which is 4.4 meters. So we're going to need to go to our move tool, and basically what we're doing is we want to move it on the Z axis 4.4 meters. Now notice that when I move this, you will see the number down below on the Z axis changing. So what we're going to do, I'm going to just undo that, is I'm going to click on the first point here, and then in the Z field that I have here, I'm going to type in these measurements so that it gets the height. So I'm going to type 4.4 M. Then the next one I have is 5. Notice that when I clicked the first time, it highlighted my land. If in Max, if you can hover, and as soon as it highlights the right object, there we go, then you know you've selected the right object. So this is 5 meters. Now there we go. Now notice that, let me just get that good, missed it, there we go. This is 5.6 it seems, and I don't have to type 5.6 M because my default units is actually meters. So if I type 5.6 and press enter, that should also be fine. Okay, so I'm going to give the rest of these some height. So let me orbit a bit. You can see where the contours are now getting proper height. So here we go. This next line I have here is, what's this now? That is 6.2. If you're having trouble seeing the information that you have here, you can always refer back to your original sketch, which is going to be a little bit clearer than your viewport. Okay, so the next one is 6.8. That is this one here. and that is 6.8. Enter. Then the next one is 7.4. 7.4. Enter. Let me orbit around. Their contour is looking pretty good. This is 5.6, it seems like. Yep. So on our 5.6. I pan down a little bit. This one here is 5. Enter. This is 4.4. So we're gonna hover there and just click that and go 4.4. The next one that we have here is, I think that is 3.8, right? So I'm gonna click in here, go 3.8, pan out a little bit. Then next we have 3.2, that's that one. Then next we have, can't make out that on that one, so that is, let me see, 2.6. Pan down a bit, so this one is 2.6. Next one is 2. Pan around, alright. This next one we have here is also 2. That's pretty much flat. Then we have 2.6 here. And then we have 3.2. So you realize if you have a lot of contour lines, then you're going to have more work to do. So, you know, you don't want to put too much contour lines, you know, in your design. And the next one is 3.8. And then there is 4.4. And the last one is 5. Great. So if I orbit around, notice that, you know, you can see the terrain being formed with our lines there. So now what we have to do is to turn these lines into a mesh. Now, in order to do that, we need to make this one object. Notice that each one of these lines that you see here are all individual objects. We know they are individual objects if I turn on my scene explorer, my layer explorer, which by default might be on for depending on which Macs you're using. It looks like that. It's usually docked over here. There we go. It's usually docked over there. And notice that each one of these are actually different objects on layer 0, which is the default layer. Now, in order for Max to create a terrain, these all need to be one object. And when I say one object, I don't mean a group, I mean a single object. So to do that, we're going to click any line here. Let's try this one here. And what we want to do is modify this line, and the way in which we're going to modify it is to attach everything else to this line. So as we usually do whenever we need to modify an object, we head over to our modify panel for the object we have selected. And if you scroll down enough, this is what now, under the geometry heading, notice you see the attach command here. So we click attach, and what this will allow us to do is to attach other line objects to this object here. Notice if you hover over the box or even the plane, you don't get that icon. There is that icon there that tells you to attach, and that's because they are not lines. Only lines can be attached to lines, and it would make sense. So we want to just click here, attach, and then attach, and we want to attach all of these lines. Let me orbit a bit. Notice my attach button is still activated, so attach. There we go. And we need to attach these as well. Now you can't attach something that is already attached. So notice that if I hover over a line that I have already attached, it will not, give me the option to attach. Alright, that's the last one. Okay, now we need to deactivate the attach icon. This is a common thing. Always remember to deactivate the commands that you're currently in by pressing the escape button. Alright, now this is one object. And now what we're going to do, we're going to create a terrain object. So what we're going to do with the object with the terrain selected, we're going to go to create, and we're going to create a geometry. After all, a terrain surface is an actual geometry. However, it is not a standard primitives, as standard primitives are things like box and spheres and cylinders and tubes and so forth. What we're going to create, we're going to change that by clicking on that drop down icon there, and we're going to create a compound object. So we're going to click that, and notice that now these elements here, these buttons here, refer to compound objects that we can create. And the compound objects that we want to create in this case is a terrain, which is here. So you have to make sure that you have your single object of line selected, and you click the terrain button, and that's it. You have a terrain mesh. There we go. And that's pretty cool. Now, just like any object in Max, right? Let's press escape to deactivate the terrain command. Just like any object in Max, you can modify. So if I click on terrain and head over to modify, notice that you have options that you can use to edit your terrain. There we go. These are some pretty cool options. Now we're not going to mess with those right now, but pretty much you can see, if I angle this just right, you can kind of see your terrain that you just created. Alright? Alright, so here's our sketch. I'm going to just move my sketch vertically up so you can see that was your original and that is your terrain there. Now the last thing we want to do is we want to create the element for the water body, and that's really the simplest thing. Our water body, if I go to change it from shaded to edged faces, you can kind of see. Let me modify this to change the color so you can see it a little bit better. So I'm going to click on it, head over to modify, and I'm going to change the color that's located here to maybe a deeper green. There we go. So you can kind of make out that your water body is flowing through here. And to create the water body, simply we want to just create a flat object. So we could just use a plane. So we go to create geometry. The type of geometry we want to create is not a compound object. We want to go back to standard primitives, because that's where we find plane. So with with a plane, we're going to click that, and we're going to just draw a plane, arbitrary plane. And we're going to go to our move tool here. Let's orbit. Now we're going to give the plane some height, and let's move it down a bit. There we go. And that's basically our water object. We can go to modify for the plane. Make sure we have the plane selected. Head over to modify, and we can change things like the width of the plane and the length. Notice that there are a couple segments here. You can actually change that. Here we go with the width and height segments. It doesn't really affect you. And for those of us who want to get a bit more control over our plane here, I mean, this is pretty okay. If I should orbit down and zoom in and take a nice angle like that, it pretty much looks like water, so it's, it's okay. If you guys want to take it a step further, then what you can do is you can modify the points that you have here to shape it into your river if you want. Alright, but pretty much a big enough plane will give you the idea of a river. Alright, so that is it to create a terrain and a water object, a plane to represent water. If one last thing, if I just find my box that I had here representing my building, and I move that vertically up. So pretty much according to my sketch, I'm going to make this red so we can see it. According to my sketch, that is where my building would fall in relation. And I can always change the height of my plane to adjust the height of the water. Alright. Okay, and that in about 30 minutes is how you create a terrain in 3ds Max from a sketch. Thanks for watching.